Brothers, welcome to this quarter's town hall meeting. I'm happy to present Andy Anderson, who's a partner at TreanorHL. He's a designer, architect, and he's going to take you through the steps that they use to design a project. He's going to share what they're seeing in the industry and some creative ideas on how you might think about going about either your redesigns or your rebuilds for your property. Andy, take it away.
Awesome. Well, hi, I'm Andy Anderson. I'm a TreanorHL architect. Been practicing architecture for almost 30 years now. Been doing Greek housing for probably 25, 26 years now. We've done lots of projects, and we'll talk a little bit more about ourselves in the slideshow here. So Dio, if you want to go ahead and start the slideshow and make sure everybody can see that. Okay. So this presentation is titled Programming, which is really how we set the direction for a successful housing project. It's the process we go through, the initial steps in planning a project before we start doing any design. I've also added a few extra areas to cover in this presentation. One of it, which is talking about some trends, design trends, and some features of houses that we're seeing that are potential things that can increase desirability of your house and also help with the recruitment. But so in the interest of giving you all an opportunity to ask questions and interest of covering some of those trends, I'm going to kind of breeze through this main part of programming a little quicker than normal. I will try to cover it pretty quickly, but I will make sure it's clear. And just be aware that we're going to make this presentation available to all of you, this PDF, and you will be able to refer to that. And we also will make my contact information. John can provide that to you if you want to follow up with me with an email or call. I'm glad to answer questions. So with that, I'll get started. Like I said, I'm with TreanorHL Architects, formerly with Hug & Associates, a small firm located in Alpharetta, north of Atlanta, Georgia. We've been doing Greek housing for many, many years until 2019. We joined with a larger company, TreanorHL, which has 11 offices around the country, over 150 plus employees. And our Greek Life studio, like I said, is located in Alpharetta in Atlanta. You can go to the next slide. This is our team. The Greek Life team at TreanorHL is composed of Greek Life members that are in our Lawrence, Kansas office, as well as those of us who came from the Atlanta office. We have 8 design professionals and that have been practicing Greek housing for many, many years. Our leadership, Steve Moline, the principal, as well as I, Kyle, Will, and really all of our team. We have a combined experience of 75 years doing Greek housing, if you add all the experience. And to date, we've done, combined with Trainer and Hug & Associates, and then the projects we've done subsequent to the merger, we've designed over 175 sorority and fraternity housing projects around the country. All right, you can go, Dio. So like I said, this is about programming, and really it's about creating the vision and defining the project, and that's what we call programming. All right, next. So before we start programming, I added this slide because it's something that I think is very important to groups nowadays. It's the kind of the first steps, and what this is really about is identifying strategic partners. Strategic partners include all of those professionals that we have worked with on multiple projects who have extensive experience in doing Greek housing projects around the country and for many, many years, and they serve a variety of functions, and I'll tell you a little bit about those. But first, I want to encourage you all who are considering doing a project, whether it's a new build, a renovation, or capital improvements or whatever, get together a really good building committee and a separate finance committee. All of you are volunteers. You all have lives, and you have limited time, and so it's important to try to identify and get as much participation and really kind of break out the responsibilities. Now, it's important to have a little cross-pollination between those committees, but encourage you to have committees that can deal with all the financing as well as the building project. But once you define those committees, it's important to engage professionals that have experience in Greek housing. The first, of course, is an architect, and that's the group I would represent. We specialize almost exclusively in Greek housing, as I said earlier, and so we are experts in the field, and we're happy to help you. Another important strategic partner to consider is a project management company, such as CSL Management or the Kalos Group. Those groups have extensive experience not only in helping groups manage their properties on an ongoing basis, but have extensive skills in managing the construction and design process as your representative, and have a lot of experience and good advice. So those are really important strategic partners. The other important part of that is having someone who knows how to help you guys with financing. Residential Capital Corporation, who is really Jen Henson, is the main person there. She has decades of experience purely helping Greek organizations get financing, getting loans. She's very creative and diligent about helping groups find financing, but she's also very good about helping you prepare a pro forma and helping you really understand your outlays and your revenues, and really understanding how much you can afford to finance for a project. And then finally, fundraising professionals. Almost all the fraternity houses that we do go through a fundraising phase because they need that money to help fund the project. And Pennington is one of the largest companies. Elevate, and there's another one, Collins Project Management. They all have extensive experience in helping Greek groups raise money. And they, the Greek houses that we've done that have been successful, especially on the fraternity side, have been those groups that have worked with professional fundraising professionals, companies. And so I encourage you all to think about that. I'll talk a little bit more later about why we think meal services or meal plans are very important to the revenue, can be a significant source of profit and revenue for your chapter. But because we're talking about strategic partners, there's a lot of really highly trained, highly professional, highly experienced food meal service vendors who specialize purely in serving food and operating kitchens for Greek organizations. And that list of those here, and there's even more that have come on of late. All right, Dio, next slide. So now we're going to get back into programming. So programming is really the critical thinking that sets the direction of the house before the design is started. Sometimes clients come to us and say, hey, let's start. There's the house we want. Here's the parts we want. Let's start design. And we say, well, hold on. We need to spend the time to make informed decisions, to make sure and create consensus across all of the stakeholders so that we can bracket this project, make sure we're all in agreement about what we're doing and we're maintaining it, keeping it on track and on budget. This process should include a broad cross section of your alumni and your active members, because this is our one and most important opportunity at the beginning of such a significant endeavor as doing a project, to really make sure that all the voices in your team and in your realm are heard, and we're integrating and consolidating all those ideas. Next slide, please. So I mentioned involvement. Most of these building committees we work with are primarily made up of senior executive men who are late in their career and are very successful, and they're partially doing this because they're passionate about the chapter, but also because they can afford to donate their time and money to the chapter. But things have changed a lot in the 25 to 75 years, perhaps, since those alumni were in school. And so it's very important in this process of programming that you include a broad spectrum of young members and alumni, perhaps some of the successful young alumni that were perhaps officers who've just graduated, and even several of the active members who are currently in the chapter. These guys have their ear to the ground. They know what the current trends are in the culture of their campuses. They understand what Greek life is like on campuses now. And so it's important that those guys' voices are included in this process. Okay, next slide, Dio. So the first thing we need to figure out when we're doing this project is what is the budget? Our clients say, how much is this going to cost? And so over the years, we've developed metrics that help us bracket the potential scope and the potential cost for the project. And the main thing that drives that is the number of beds in the house, because the beds are what basically provides the revenue. It drives the area of the house. And ultimately, that area of the house, the scope of work, drives the construction cost. So that's the first metric we start with. Now, it varies from campus to campus. Some campuses have lodges where they have almost no beds in them, and some campuses have half their members living in the house where there's not a lot of off-campus options. But in general, in most places, in larger Greek campuses, you'll typically see about 25% of the membership living in the house, which is usually made up of the sophomores. So if you take a quarter of your active membership as a starting point, that's how many beds you would likely have in the house. In all of the Greek housing that we've done over the decades, the sizes of those houses have ranged from, say, a low of around 300 square foot to as high as about 450 square feet per bed. Now, what that means is you take the gross area of the house, however big it is, say it's a 20,000 square foot house, and you divide it by 40 beds, and that would give you a 500 square foot per bed. Now, that's obviously highly generous, so we wouldn't do on that size, but that's kind of how you arrive at that metric. So we usually target, especially given today's construction costs, we target between, usually for fraternities, around 325 to 350 square foot per bed. And that usually accommodates the majority of the programmatic functions that the fraternity needs and wants, including the dining room, living spaces, the beds, baths, and all that. So that's kind of a good starting point. So once we've kind of established a gross area of the house, then we can apply construction costs. Now, these numbers are constantly changing, as many of you know, with COVID and the inflation we've been seeing. Prices have continued to climb. But currently, we're seeing, depending on where you are in the country, construction costs are ranging from $450 to $550 per square foot, which is obviously a high number. So you basically take that area per bed times the number of beds times the dollars per square foot. You've bracketed a number, and I make a note here. If you were doing a 40-bed house based on the metrics we described, that would give you about a 12 to 18,000 square foot house. At 450 to 550, that would be about 5.4 to 9.9 million. Now, that's a huge range, right? That's a huge range, and it's also a high number. So the point of going through programming is, from this point forward, we start to chip away at that number by refining the program, by refining the scope of the work, and then we can narrow that range for you as we move forward. One important thing to remember is that those construction costs do not include all your soft costs or owner's costs. And we'll talk more about those in detail later. I'll cover those, but those usually account for about 20 to 25% of the construction costs. So your project cost is about 125% of your construction costs, or as low as 120% of your construction costs. The opinion of probable construction costs is essentially the process we just went through, where we bracket what we think the project's going to cost. And we will update that periodically as the design progresses, as we define the scope more, as we do some design, so that we're constantly working together to make sure that we're all aware of where the costs for this project are going to be. And then the last point there is we think is very important to select a qualified general contractor. And we have a lot of experience helping groups select those contractors, or pre-qualify a group of contractors, preferably ones who have done project types similar to this, or even better if they've done other Greek housing, because having a contractor on board, they're the only ones on the team that are really capable of getting real numbers and providing good estimates. So getting them on board early can help us confirm some of these preliminary budget numbers. All right, next slide, Dio. So now that we've kind of bracketed or sort of defined what we think the budget's going to be, now we got to figure out, well, how do you afford that, and how can we make that work? Well, the way you do that is you basically prepare a pro forma, and a pro forma is really just an analysis of your initial and future costs, both the construction and ongoing maintenance and upkeep cost, versus what is your current capital, meaning how much cash you have on hand, how much equity do you have in your property, and what's your future revenue? Because the net between those two really defines what can you afford, and how much can we afford to pay in service of debt to make this house happen, and how much of a house can we afford. And as I mentioned before, there are strategic partners that we work with that are experts in helping and assisting you in preparing those pro formas, and really diving in and looking at all of your expenses and all of your revenues. So your revenue, as I'm sure many of you know, or most of you know, that comes from your room rents is probably the biggest one, your social or parlor fees, your profits from your meal plan, and also your ongoing fundraising efforts from your capital campaign. It's also very important to make sure you're not leaving any potential revenue sources on the table. I think one of the things that is common in a lot of smaller groups, and there's a threshold where it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, but having a meal plan can also be a very profitable way to add to your revenue. But the other way that you can really take a hard look at your revenue is looking at your competition. A lot of groups, fraternity groups, feel like they have to give bottom barrel rents just to get people to live in the house. But if you're planning on doing a major renovation or building a new house, hopefully you're creating a facility that's on par in terms of quality and amenities with other options out there. And so you want to make sure that what you're charging your members is competitive with other options, not only with other Greek houses that are that you would consider your competition, but also whatever else is on campus in terms of student housing, dorms. What are they charging? And also the off-campus apartments in your area, what are they charging? So being able to identify those rents allows you to make sure that you're charging a competitive rate because you want to maximize that revenue. But ultimately, the funds raised through the capital campaign, plus any equity or cash you have on hand, plus a bank loan, that ultimately determines your budget, how much you can afford to spend. And then that mortgage is serviced, debt serviced through those room rents, social parlor fees, and profits from the meal plan, that revenue. And that's why that pro forma is so important, because it'll show you how to maximize your revenue so that you can maximize how much you can afford to borrow so you can afford to build the house that you want. And again, the anticipated revenue should be based on the competitive rates. All right, next slide. So this is important. These are three interrelated, pretty self-explanatory variables in a project, but really they're all interrelated and they all affect one another. And the point of this is to talk about how we help you balance them. The cost one at the top is just really the dollars, the total budget for the project, how much you can afford to spend on the project, what's the maximum cost you can afford for this project. The lower left is the area or square footage, which is the scope of the project. How big a project do you have, and how large is it, and does it meet the program requirements of your chapter? And finally, the quality, which is the dollars per square foot. How much are we willing to invest, or how much can we invest in the materials and systems in this house to maintain a durable and long-lasting house? And so the point of this is you can pick two, but you can't, and the other one's going to have to float. So you're going to have to learn how to balance all three to make sure that it's a successful project. So for instance, if you have a maximum budget, so I can only afford to spend $5 million on this renovation, and we've got to add, 5,000 square feet because we need that larger chapter room, or we need those bedrooms or whatever, then ultimately the quality number is going to have to reflect that. And when you take that budget and divide it by that area, if the quality number gets below a certain threshold, you may realize that, hey, that's not going to be the best investment of our money. We're not going to be able to install durable and long-lasting materials. So we're going to have to probably reduce the scope of the project, or we're going to have to raise our budget. So it's really a way to check all three and make sure that you are balancing all of those interrelated and all very important parts of the project. Okay, next slide, Dia. So I mentioned owner's costs earlier. Owner's costs are all those soft costs that happen with a project, and I won't go through this list in exhaustive, but they include all of your fees, your professional architectural engineering fees, the fees you pay to your fundraising professional. They pay for your builder's risk insurance, your water, sewer, tap fees, your legal services, closing costs, interest, furniture and things that aren't provided by the contractor, donor recognition, hazardous materials. I mean, there's a whole number of them. And the point of this is just to make sure if you're planning a project that you allocate a certain percentage of your budget to account for all of these soft costs. And again, they usually range from 20 to 25% of whatever the construction cost is, would be what's in addition for owner's costs. The one that's in here says construction cost contingency. That's probably one of the most important ones to maintain. Projects inevitably have creep in not only schedule, but in scope and costs. And a lot of those things are unpredictable, and they're not always easy to plan for. Nobody's perfect in this industry, not you, not us, not the contractor. So there are going to be things that happen where you're going to need more money than you thought. And so maintaining an adequate construction cost contingency above and beyond what your budget is will allow you to plan for those inevitabilities. Now, as the project proceeds from start to till the day you start construction, that amount you want to hold can be reduced. From the beginning at design development, where the design's the scope's kind of defined, but there's a lot of details and we're still months away from starting construction, you might want to hold a 10 to 15% contingency depending on the size and complexity of the project. And as you move towards the day that you're ready to break ground, and the contract has been signed and the contractor's putting the bulldozers to dig up the dirt, you're still going to want to hold at least a 3 to 5% contingency, because there's going to be something that's unforeseen. You may have bad soils that there's no way to know about until you start digging the foundations, or you're going to have weather delays, or you're going to have labor delays, or you're going to have something that comes up that you decide that you got to have in the project that nobody thought about or mentioned. So having that contingency is critical, and it's even more important for a renovation or addition, because as you know, when you're dealing with an existing building, often a really old building, you really don't know what you're getting into until you start doing demolition. You've got lots of unforeseen existing conditions that are behind walls. You have antiquated, potentially MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, hazardous materials. There's a lot of things that you can't predict or be aware of until you start the project. So for a renovation, we recommend you hold at least a 10 to 15% contingency at the start of construction for those kinds of projects. But including the higher contingencies earlier in the project allows you the flexibility as the project moves forward. You can absorb some of those eventual increases in the estimates as the project gets closer to start, without having to do major changes to the design late in the game and really disappointing all the stakeholders who have really bought into this project. So it's really just insurance against that risk. All right, next slide. Schedule is very important to understand. These projects always take longer than you think they're going to take. And you'll see 2 line items in here, fundraising feasibility study and fundraising capital campaign. That can vary significantly, especially the capital campaign. We have projects that we've designed that are still raising money 2 and 3 years later. And those are not things that we can really control. A professional fundraiser can help you determine what they think it's going to take. But again, those things take time. So you'll see this schedule is sort of a minimum schedule is basically 2 to 2.5 years from start to finish. So, and the other important thing about the schedule, as we all know, is that the most critical thing is when you move in the house, it's got to be in the fall before recruitment. So the idea is that we work with you from that end date when we know the house has got to be ready to move in, and we work back from that date, including contingencies to the schedule, so that we know that we're starting early enough. The worst thing that can happen is when the client calls us, in the summer saying they want to, move in the spring the next year, and we're like, there's absolutely not enough time to do this project. So it's very important to recognize that these projects take time, and you plan for that. Let's go to the next slide. Construction costs versus project longevity. This is what I was mentioning earlier, where Greek houses are kind of unique in the sense that they tend to be long life cycle buildings, even when they're not designed to be. These projects don't happen very often, maybe once every 50 years if you're lucky, sometimes longer. So it's important when you're planning a project, especially when you're investing lots of time and effort and sweat equity and going through all the gnashing of teeth to make this project happen, that you really think hard about how you invest your money. And so without going through these in detail, it's important for us to work with you to balance the quality and the longevity and durability with the cost, because it's important to invest in higher quality, more durable, longer life cycle materials and systems, because ultimately they're going to last a lot longer. And it also reduces your life cycle costs, your energy costs potentially. It can reduce your ongoing maintenance and upkeep costs, and actually make your house last longer. So I mean, this is the one time when we can really make sure we're doing the right things and make this house last even 100 years. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this is the fun part. Another decision that we work with you early on is what is the building character of this house? And there's all kinds of style of architecture out there, but we help you think about the considerations and how we define this. The look of the house is really what defines your chapter on campus. It's sort of the first image, the first impression your chapter makes on campus when people walk down the street. And we know it's very important to you. It's important to consider what's the prevailing architectural history and style of the region in the country where you are, or on the campus where you are, to make sure that the design is timeless and fits in within the character of the place that it is. And it's also important to understand your history and understand, oftentimes if we do a new house, we'll build it in a style similar to the style that the original house was in, as kind of an homage to that, because that's what the chapter identifies with. So we can help you think about the different variables that determine this and help you select a style. But ultimately, we think a timeless design that fits in within the context is what's going to stand the test of time. All right, you can go to the next slide. Other decisions, I'll run through this really quick. It's just every site's different, every location is different, and this is just to let you know that we really do all these considerations. You know, one of the biggest challenges in Greek housing is dealing with local zoning ordinances, dealing with parking, dealing with the campus goals, master plan, and historical precedents. And so we help you navigate all of those things, and help you achieve variances to zoning regulations when necessary to make the design work, even if it's at odds with the zoning regulations. We have experience working with authorities having jurisdiction, meaning building officials and planning officials and university officials, to help you navigate the design process in light of all the site and campus conditions that you're up against. We also help you think about, you know, many of your members that live in the house or even attend the house for lunch or come into the house from campus, from where their classes are. So we think about where's the pedestrian access to the house in relation to the campus, and that determines how we design the house. What's the topography of the site? You know, a lot of sites are flat, but some are really steep. And so what's the solar orientation? You know, if you're in Arizona and it's really hot there, it's important to make sure that outdoor covered areas are on the north side of the house so that you're avoiding the most of the sun for the day. Or if you have a steep site, maybe we incorporate a basement to make the house work with the site better. And then finally, you know, there's existing trees or outcroppings of rock on the site, or there's other specific things on the site that are existing, its relationship to the street and whether it's on a corner or not. Those are kind of considerations that will help you navigate. All right, go to the next slide. A few other decisions. The first one's kind of interesting. You know, most Greek groups, especially the fraternities, have certain things about their chapter house that really is important to their identity. It's either a special room with a special name, it's a sculpture, it's a medallion, or it's just something about the house that signifies the culture. And a little story we did. There's a house we did, a new house for Kappa Sigma at Georgia Tech. And they had a space in the basement where they had dug out under their crawl space and created this little man cave kind of area where they, you know, had parties and played ping pong and hung out. And it was kind of, and they called it the pit, right? And it was really dark and dank, and it wasn't a very pleasant spot, but they had fond memories of it. So when we did the new house, all of the members, the alumni, said, we've got to have the pit in the house. So we designed this basement space. It was really fun and kind of industrial and had a lot of cool memorabilia in it. And it kind of created that memory of that space, but it was much nicer, much more usable. So, you know, teasing out from you, what are the unique things about your chapter and how do we incorporate those into the house? Another important consideration is whether you're doing elevated beds or not. Many of you have those in your houses, and because they're very efficient, we help you navigate that decision. You know, if you do built-in elevated beds at the beginning, it avoids you know, members just doing whatever they want to do in the room. It also helps you in defining educational space within the sleeping room, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. It provides more usable space, so it's an important consideration. Some chapters don't want them, but a lot of chapters do, and so we help you make that decision. And lastly, I talked about this earlier. You know, fraternities really should be designed prison grade quality, because as we all know, chapters and members are notoriously brutal to fraternity houses, and it's hard for them to stand up to the test of time. And so we help you in selecting those very durable materials where they're necessary to help resist some of that wear and tear. And finally, you know, energy efficient windows, HVAC, LED lighting, and insulation, all those things help make the house more comfortable, but also reduce your energy costs over time and make the house more energy efficient. All right, keep going. Dio. All right, and finally, there's a few more decisions. One of the other big decisions is a lot of the chapters come to us, we got to have a separate chapter room. Well, the dining room and the chapter room are the two largest spaces in the entire house, no matter what kind of house it is. And so what we found over time is one of the best ways to keep the cost in check while maintaining that functionality is to have a dual use space, which serves both as the dining room and the chapter room. And the way we can do that is we can provide convenient and adequate and easy to use chair and table storage space, which we design based on how many seats you need. So it allows that changeover fairly easily. So it's not such a pain to do that, and really helps you avoid doubling up on a significant amount of square footage. There's other multi-use spaces within the house too, and we help you think about different kinds of study spaces that can double up as training rooms or other things like that. Sleeping room mix is another big decision. We work with a lot of chapters that say, oh, we don't want anything but single rooms. And then some chapters say, we want all doubles. And we have some chapters where we say we want a mix, and we want even some triples and quads. I'd say the majority of the houses we design that are affordable and can be built within budget usually consist of a majority of double rooms. But it's something that we need to work with you early on and talk about the pros and cons of that room mix and how that affects the overall cost and scope of the project. But even if we have mostly doubles, we still would encourage you to consider having a certain percentage of single rooms, maybe 2 to 4, with two of those rooms each sharing a private bath, for the benefit of attracting upperclassmen and officers to live in the house. We think it's important, and we hear that it's important from our chapters that having more senior members living in the house really helps in terms of leadership and mentoring and contributing to the life of the chapter, and we think that's important. Finally, security, access control, AV, internet, and Wi-Fi, all those low voltage systems, as we call them, are all very important and integral to a Greek house, especially fraternities. And so we help you navigate those often complex and difficult to understand systems to achieve the best of low voltage systems for your house. All right, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit now about investing in your house, and it's really going to come down to like, can you afford to do a house, or are you going to do a renovation? But this first slide here is really interesting. They actually, I think Pennington presented this at the FHA conference that John and I attended. It really shows the data on existing chapter housing out there, and you can see from this pie chart that 75% or almost 75% of Greek housing out there is over 25 years old, and over 50% is over 75 years old. So we know that our housing is aging. And so we all got to understand what are we going to do for Greek housing as we move forward. So it's good to understand that data. Next slide. So now we talk about when does it make sense to renovate, and when does it make sense to build a new house? Now it's not always is black and white. Every situation is unique, but we found a few indicators that help you make that decision. The first one is like if what you plan to do in terms of renovations and additions to meet your program, if that costs less than 50% of what a whole new house would cost, then it might make sense to do an addition or renovation. And there's sort of two general categories of houses where we see renovations being desirable or necessary. The first is that the house is dysfunctional, meaning it doesn't really have all the spaces or they aren't the right size or configuration to meet the needs of the chapter. But the house itself is historically significant, especially on some of these campuses where they're in a historic district, and you really can't tear the house down, or you wouldn't want to, and it's very attractive. So you think, well, what will we do that? Well, you might add an addition on the rear of the house that might add, the modern kitchen, or expand the dining chapter room, or add some more sleeping rooms to meet some of the deficiencies. Or the addition might solve any number of functional deficiencies. It might allow you to add the elevator that you need, or the additional fire stair. Or you can reconfigure some small spaces to create larger more multi-use spaces that kind of help resolve some of those functional deficiencies, renovating bathrooms to add ADA accessibility, things like that. The other scenario is the house is functional, but it's really unattractive. We see this a lot with a lot of the mid-century modern houses built in the 50s and 60s, where they brought pretty solid bones. They've kind of got all the spaces you really want. They're pretty good structured, and they're pretty good open spaces, but they're just really darn ugly, and they haven't stood the test of time in terms of the character and the look, and they aren't competitive. And in those cases, we can work with you to add upgrade exterior finishes, do exterior additions with roof lines and porches, upgrade this hardscape and landscaping and things like that, where we can really bring the character up significantly. We did an addition to the Zeta Tau Alpha house at University of Florida that was really unattractive, and we did a small addition. Now, we were fortunate because the house, the place to add on was in the front of the house. It's not always that convenient, but we added onto the front of the house and dropped the entry level of the floor on the front of the house, and it created a much taller facade, and it was much more traditional and classical looking, and it just completely changed. We did the Delta Gamma house at University of Georgia, very similar. We got rid of an ugly mid-century mansard roof, which is that kind of like really steep kind of pitch. You see the French, you think of it a French roof. And we basically extended the walls vertically through the third floor and added a more traditional roof, and it just completely changed the look of the house. But the bones of the house were fine, and that's why we did that renovation. All right, next slide. But this is the case where, and again, we know everybody can't afford a new house, but at some point you can't kick the can down the road any farther. So if the renovations or additions that you think we need, or we think we all need to make the house competitive, make it meet your demands, or make it meet your needs, is more than the cost of 50% of a new house, then if it's possible, it might be worth investing the additional money to build the house. And that's for several reasons. You know, a lot of the older houses have small and undersized spaces. People just lived with smaller spaces, especially bathrooms, closets, sleeping rooms. And many of those old houses have load-bearing walls, which make it very difficult to reconfigure those existing spaces. And it becomes very expensive from a structural standpoint. Ceiling heights can be really, really low, and especially in public spaces, there's code accessibility deficiencies. HVAC systems are antiquated. They're both dysfunctional and attractive. So again, we know you can't afford a new house every time, but sometimes it's worth thinking about it. And I know we're running low on time, but this analogy is really great because my former boss, Mike Hugg, came up with this. You know, in the 70s, there was this car called the Chevy Vega. John will remember this. That was not considered a very desirable car. So the analogy is, if you got an old beat up, worn out Vega and you restore it to pristine, better than factory condition, it may look perfect, but you know what? It's still a Vega, and it may not be very desirable. So the point is only so much lipstick you can put on that pig, if you will. It's like throwing good money after bad. That's not always the case. And again, we know everybody can't afford a new house, but it's worth doing this analysis and really understanding, is it worth investing in the renovation? All right, next slide. I'm going to try to go through. Let's just skip this one. We're running low on time. I know you guys want to talk about educational space. One of the things that's important to understand is that support spaces, which are the walls, corridors, stairs, elevators, bathrooms, electrical rooms, those things support both educational and non-educational spaces. Now, what that means is that if you have a house that's 40% educational, 40% non-educational, and 20% support space, if you take out the support space, you're left with 50-50 educational, non-educational. And that's really the percentage of the house that can be educational space, 50%. So that's important to understand that. Can you go to the next slide? That's just a designation of the types of spaces. Qualified educational spaces are spaces that are only used for educational purposes. They include libraries, study rooms, educational storage project areas or maker spaces, and the study areas and bedrooms. And all the other social spaces, including the kitchen, dining, living rooms, those are all non-educational spaces. So you can go to the next slide. So deductible expenses, and it's important to remember this, is the whole point of this discussion is defining a qualified educational space allows you to take donations that are tax deductible from your donors. Often they do it through the foundation, but to raise money in a capital campaign, it's very important to be able to provide tax deductibility to your largest donors. And so defining this space in the house is very important. But it's not just the initial construction costs. It includes all those owner's costs or soft costs I talked about earlier, as well as your annual operating costs. So any costs that are associated with the house, whatever the percentage net educational area, it can be applied. That percentage can be applied to all of those costs. Usually we see about 15 to 50%. 50 is pretty rare, but at least 15% of the total net usable area is educational. And we really understand the IRS rules. We've worked with John Christopher, who is with Fraternal Law Partners, who is an expert in fraternity and sorority law, and has worked with us extensively to define educational space within houses. So we can help you maximize that. All right, next slide. All right, now we get to the part that I think John really is talk about some trends. And so I'll kind of go through these pretty quick. But one of the things that's important to understand, and this the message we continue to hear time and time again, is that the priorities of the members, it's about the experience, brotherhood, and belonging. And we firmly believe that designing a fraternity house and what we do in the house should be towards that mission, towards building brotherhood and belonging. And that's really what attracts new members. But it's also important to remember that a lot of the young people today coming to college are very unique in terms of their desires and needs. You have a very diverse population now. Everyone has unique needs and challenges. So it's important to understand those. But in general, we see that a lot of the priorities are privacy, security, learning, their education. A lot of these students really take their education seriously, even when they're in a fraternity, their physical and mental health, and their well-being. So the types of spaces, and some of these we have in houses, but it's important to understand why they're important to be especially nice. Like a really good quality, dedicated serving room with 24-hour kitchen with lots of on-demand beverages and snack options with hot and cold wells, and lots of refrigeration and toasters, ovens, things like that. It's really the hub for the food in the house, and creating that space and doing it really well and having adequate space for that really can make that a really strong recruiting tool. It's very attractive to members. Outdoor living is very important. Covered decks and porches. Outdoor living is, spaces that you can hang out, having fire pits, even having a basketball or volleyball court, outdoor grilling areas. Those are the kind of amenities that really add to the quality, especially on tailgating and game days, really make the chapter attractive. We see a lot of demand for gaming rooms. A lot of guys are gaming now, and they really want a space where they can go in there and play video games with their friends. We see desires for like gym and workout areas with weights to maintain their health, and then places where we can have perhaps pool tables or ping pong tables or other recreational things in houses. We still feel strongly that the group bathrooms are in general the way to go, not only from a cost standpoint, but in terms of a brotherhood and interaction standpoint. I think that many of us know that, especially if you're a busy student, oftentimes one of the few times you actually interact with your brothers is when you're getting ready in the morning to go to class in the bathroom, or when you're sitting down for dinner or chapter. So these spaces can be really nice. We design these country club bathrooms with the private showers, with the private dry off areas in each shower, with high-end finishes. They're also maintained by a cleaning vendor, perhaps. They can be really nice spaces, and I think it's important to invest the money in those spaces because that's where a lot of men spend their time together. We think having a variety of private study, online testing, interview rooms are important. They're like single person spaces where guys can take an online test or do an interview. And they also kind of serve as those little sanctuary or mental health spaces where you're having a tough day, or you just need to get away from everybody, or you have to have a tough call with your girlfriend or your parents. You can get away in a space that is private and is available. Students like a variety of options for study and learning. No longer do you have the big just study room. You have lots of smaller group study rooms, some with soft seating, with chairs and couches, some with 4-top tables, some with built-in counters, and then those single-use rooms. So having a variety of places for members to study. And then even some maker spaces or multi-use spaces where they can build or make things or do crafts or other activities that don't damage or interfere with the other functions of the house. Let's go to the next slide. And finally, trends for systems. One of the ones we're doing in almost most all the Greek housing is the variable refrigerant flow HVAC system, which is really where you have the individual wall mounted unit in your room. Some people call those mini splits. It's similar to that. But what that allows is each individual room can have individual temperature control, and that's often considered very valuable and desirable by your members. Obviously, Wi-Fi is huge. Having a very robust bandwidth on your Wi-Fi is critical, and we can help you with that infrastructure. But we've also heard that, because of the gaming, a lot of the men want individual hard network connections in their sleeping rooms so they can attach their computers directly for that added bandwidth. And so we talked to you about that. Security and access control has really got sophisticated, especially with cameras and intrusion alarms and things like that being much more user-friendly and less visible. Cameras are pretty much limited to the exterior, of course. But also the access control, members can use their smartphone as access credentials. So no more lost fobs or cards because people tend to hold on to their phones. And it also makes it easy to add and remove users. You can monitor entry and exit doors, and it provides a really ease of use and a very secure way to provide access control to your facilities. And finally, AV and sound is very important. Whole house audio, whether we have speakers in all the public spaces, if so desired, using wireless microphone setups and large flat screen displays really give you a lot of flexibility for doing presentations, for doing events, for football days, or during recruitment, and especially during chapter meetings. So having a good AV system, sound system, and video system is very important too. Sorry if I rushed through that, but I know we haven't left ourselves a lot of time for Q&A, but I did want to kind of wrap all that up and give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions.
Andy, I'll start with a question.
Yes.
A challenge that many of our houses face are damaged doors and door locks
Yes.
on the gentlemen's rooms. Have you guys found a solution that is, I know nothing is bulletproof, but is there a solution out there that minimizes the amount of damage these guys can do to these doors and locks?
Well, there is, and that's one of the biggest things we see a lot is every time we do one of these Greek houses, the first thing the contractor goes is, "Why are you guys using this fancy hardware? It costs so much money." Well, the reason we're using that heavy duty hardware is for the reason you mentioned, because it needs to hold up. So the answer is use heavy duty commercial hardware. It's not the Rolls Royce, but it's what is used in commercial applications. So a lot of Greek houses, they install residential grade hardware and it doesn't hold up. The other thing is to use hollow metal doors for the bedroom doors. They're paintable, and if you dent one, you can put some Bondo on it and paint it again, and it looks like new. But those are two of the things. And I think ultimately that's about the best you can do. Just use good quality, durable hardware. Use good quality, durable doors, and create a culture where people respect the property. There's not a lot else you can do. There are access control options for individual rooms, like a hotel style, which may or may not be part of the problem. If somebody loses their key or forgets their key, they just decide to kick the door in. I don't know if that's the real issue. Those are very expensive and difficult to manage. But I think the short answer is just use the right hardware, and we know what to use in those cases. So,
are the metal doors, the metal hollow doors, are they fire rated? I'm assuming they are.
Yes, you can get fire rated hollow metal doors and fire rated wood doors. So the material doesn't affect the fire rating.
Gotcha.
Oh, it looks like you mentioned cameras outdoor only. Well, we've heard it from both sides. Some groups say, "Hey, we want cameras in certain places on the inside because we want to catch people doing things." But the other thing is you have to look at the liability and the loss prevention aspect. Is, do you catch members doing things that may or may not be illegal or may not be damaging to the chapter, but are damaging not only to your reputation or to that individual, or potentially other things? So I can't answer that question. All I can say is we have not had any Greeks wanting cameras inside. Now, we have had cameras inside facing out towards a door that's, like, say, a glass door, an entry door. that's the only portion that it captures, or we have a camera like in, say, the parcel room where to avoid theft. But in general public areas, for the reasons I mentioned, we haven't seen a lot of people want to do that for the reasons because they're more concerned about what they see on the camera than what they don't see on the camera, if that makes sense. Hopefully they answered your question. And that was from Matt Alexander.
Yep. Other questions, brothers?
Yeah, we will definitely send you, John, if you and Dio feel free to forward the PDF to the members and provide my, and hopefully I didn't rush through everything so fast, but I wanted to cover a lot of things and just give you guys a sense of, okay, if we go down this endeavor, there's a lot of things to think about, and you guys play a strong role in that team, and want to give you a little insight on what your role is and what the things we need to be doing. And if any of you have any questions or concerns or any thoughts on your own properties or needs, feel free to reach out to me. We're glad to share information with you all and give you guys advice if you need it, and we could be a resource to you for that.
Another question, you showed the picture of the elevated bed,
Yeah,
and obviously that's a soft cost, right? Because it's
not necessarily. If it's built-in millwork, it can be part of the construction cost. In fact, most of the millwork usually is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what one of those units costs? That's, you know, a sleeping area, study area, and a desk TV area for?
Yeah, well, so in that scenario, the built-in portion is the elevated bed, the ladders up to it, and then the desks would be just loose furniture in the chair. So really, the only built-in portion is the bed, and it has an integrated kind of wardrobe area, if you will, for hanging clothes. I would say for a double bed room, it's probably, I don't know. I mean, maybe $5,000 or something. It's probably more than the furniture, but at the same time, it does create the efficiency within the bedroom. The other thing too is it allows more privacy because than a traditional bunk bed, because you have a divider between the two, and they're also more rigid, so they're not loud and making a lot of noise. They're safer. So there's a lot of advantages to them. They're easier to maintain, but it's definitely more of an investment. But it does add that extra cost. But it does also allow you to, because of the nature of how you define the edge of that built-in, the rest of the room can be defined as educational space. So the whole area where the desks are, because the couch is underneath the beds, we can count that whole, really more than half of the bedroom floor area as educational space. And you apply that to every bedroom, that really adds a significant amount of educational space to the house, which can be very advantageous when you're fundraising.
Are those elevated beds, are those typically custom, or are there companies that provide their product like off the shelf where you can?
There are companies that provide similar furniture, but those are custom built-in furniture, part of the millwork package. They're pretty simple though. They're typically painted, or they can be clear finish wood, but they're not terribly fancy, if you will. And the way we design them for the men's group is we usually have them accommodate a full XL bed, which means a full size width but extra long length. Which is wider than a twin bed, because men like a little bit more room in their bed. And so they do accommodate a standard mattress, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
What's the typical square footage of a single and a double room that you're seeing?
Yeah, a single room is usually about, I want to say net, about 150 square feet. I mean, sorry, a double room is about 150 square feet. A little bit more, a little bit less. Single rooms aren't half of that. So I'd say a single room might be 100 square feet. But a double room is usually, we try to set them up, and we found that kind of like the minimum width is about 11'4" on center. So it's about 11-foot clear width in the room. And then they're usually about 15 feet deep from front to back. And we find that's pretty adequate. I mean, you know, when you're doing a fraternity house or sorority house, the sleeping rooms make up the vast majority of the square footage, at least on the upper levels. And so, you know, making those efficient and as tight as reasonable helps keep the size down. But to answer your question, about 150 square feet for a double room.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick question. This is Drew Donovan. I didn't know the trends as far as dorm rooms, cold air dorm rooms and things like that. Are people even doing those anymore?
It's something that sororities used to do, and I'm assuming you mean like the large rooms where you have one big room where everybody sleeps in there.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
a
they're
separate
not.
sleeping versus
Yeah.
bedroom.
Yeah, no, we don't really see that. We see that trend. It's really a holdover from the early days, from the early part of the 20th century and the mid-century, and especially since COVID, frankly. And I think a lot of the trends that were caused by COVID are kind of going back to the way they were before. I think that was kind of a blip in sort of the way the young people were living and wanting to live, being real, having a lot of anxiety about being around other people. But that being said, I think we've seen more of a trend of a lot of fraternities really wanting single rooms and more privacy. And so trying to work with them to find out ways where we can make that work. It's hard to do economically, though. It's really hard to build a house with nothing but single rooms unless you're just unless you just have enough money where you can afford that lack of revenue or that amount of space. But and we still see some people wanting the more suite style bathrooms, but again, we think that adds a ton of cost. You have a bunch of small, crappy little bathrooms that nobody's cleaning, and it seems to me like, and when you really give people the picture of what that looks like, most people say, "Yeah, I prefer the high end, nice, clean country club style bathroom." It still has all the privacy you need, but it's a much nicer space and it's maintained by somebody else. So I think the suite style and the single rooms, we do hear people wanting those, and we think some of those are appropriate, but that's the opposite direction from the cold dorm, to be honest with you. Yeah, we're not hearing that at all.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, Andy, thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with us regarding architecture and housing and trends. And brothers, thanks for attending. This concludes this town hall meeting. And brothers, have a good evening. Andy, have a good evening.
I appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. And like I said, let me know if you have any questions. I'd be glad to help you out.